you have to keep the bell curve in mind. I mean, because we're speaking about that earlier, as far as how we get
Yeah.
this skewed vision of what advanced or elite is based on what we're constantly exposed to. And that's a perfect example because the guys, I think most of the bell curve is comprised of people that will take androgens, even a good amount, get some immediate benefit, and then given their genetics and given their shitty training, it's not like if you get
Yeah.
an immediate jump once you start using, that doesn't sustain. You know what I mean? It levels out, diminished returns set in, your homeostasis kind of shifts up a little bit. But the only way you keep that crazy upward trajectory is if you up the dose, or if you actually have good training in genetics and know what you're doing. Yeah, absolutely, which a lot of people don't. So most of the people that are on look like shit. And I started training at LA Fitness. I was like 19, and I remember all the guys that had been on a good amount of gear for several years. And you're talking about guys that can't bench 300 pounds. You're talking about guys that have 20% body fat, guys that aren't exceptional. And you look at what they're doing, how they're eating, how they're training. And it's like most people jump on it as something that's a shortcut, which is like the most
Yeah.
useless application of it. I get the argument for it kind of being a quote unquote shortcut. But when you treat it that way, it's like the worst of both worlds. It's like, okay, you sold this thing out, because everybody is going to judge
Yeah.
you for being a drug using asshole or whatever, skewing the curve for everybody else. But at the same time, you're not getting anything out of it. You're just using it so you don't have to work that hard and go out and drink 5 nights a week and hope that the stress on your liver doesn't kill you. It's a crazy dynamic, yeah. But it just goes to show, and most of the freaks that are just running out of room to stack muscle on, it's like in a natty world, most of these guys I think are still top tier. But yeah, it's an interesting philosophical discussion. I wanted to ask
Yeah. Like,
you. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, like I see it all the time, and it's like it's always so sad because often these guys assume that everyone is on, and so these are the kind of guys who just assume that anyone with a decent physique is on, even if those guys are natural. And so that's where it's like they use a ton of stuff, and then they see a natural who looks better than them. They're just like they don't want to accept that. Like that's an even tougher pill to swallow than what they've been swallowing. So they
Absolutely.
don't even want to like. And I'm not against the if like everyone is checking all the boxes, right? Like if they've been training for a while, natural, and physique or their strength goals or whatever require it. For me, like there are so many other ways to assess a person rather than natty or enhanced. But if someone is using to like get a somewhat decent beach body, but not really because their diet sucks, like to me, like I'll judge them just based on the stupid decision. But if someone like is an elite athlete, like they're an Olympic weightlifter, and like if they don't use, they're gonna not even go, right? And
It's
if
the
they like
sport.
that's the thing, right? It's just part of the sport. It literally is, right? Like by now, I think pretty much everyone knows like a lot of professional athletes aren't natural. I know, shocking. Some people here they're just like, oh no, well I didn't think so. Like that's just part of a lot of these strength and power speed sports. Like if you look at the top 100-meter times of all time,
Yeah.
a lot of them have been busted, like amphetamines or steroids or whatever. And like the only one who hasn't been busted is Usain Bolt, but of course he was natural, right? So, and so a lot of people, they don't realize, I guess, what it takes, and but that's a totally different situation than like, you know, taking it your first year of training. Like I trolled, I don't know if you saw the video. I trolled this guy who tried to sell me steroids, and um, I was like, "What do you have for the first year?" Like, I heard Trent is good, and he's like, "Oh yeah, let me send you the list of the first year stuff." And for guys who just like think that it's just like a vitamin or something, like just it's a supplement, whereas it's a big decision.
And that's important. And I have a hard time talking about, or I have a hard time defending my use or the decisions I made without sounding like a test salesman, because there is a risk assessment. There's a trade off, and that's something I had to get right with.
Yeah.
Especially, I used to be a huge Natty White Knight up until I don't know, probably 2014. Actually, it was about the time Lance Armstrong got busted. That's what switched my mindset and the way I looked at it, because you took this guy, I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars to cancer research. He was an American legend. He was this staple, and they raked his ass over the coals without talking about the top 20 or 30 that also busted, where it's like, okay, was it the one bad egg, right, that ruined the sport? And I hear a bunch of things about competitively he was a prick, and maybe all that's true. But he was a cog in a machine where everybody else was on the same playing field, and he was still the most dominant person in the world. And that just sat with me wrong. I'm like, okay, criticize the game, criticize the lack of testing or whatever incentive structures exist for people to do this. But he got raked over the coals as like being a bad person for doing this, which showed this kind of disconnect, I think. Because what the best of the best of the best do shouldn't necessarily mirror or be expected to repeat back to people what the average person does. And as much as I can get right, because I've been doing this for 20 plus years, and I made a very specific list of decisions about what I'm willing to do and how far this is willing to go. Which, by the way, I'm fucking enjoying this year of not having anything in my system. It's like, it's shitty, but it's great. But it's, you still have to remember that people do look at you, they do follow you. And I am adamant that most people have no business being on. Most people that step into the gym that have training goals, it's not something to fuck around with. It's not something to take lightly. I treat it like, when I'm recommending it, it's like those psychotropic drugs you take, that it's like, oh, you could take this for depression. But it's like, if you go off without tapering, I don't know, you might have a stroke or something. Like, you have to take it seriously because it has real ramifications for how your body works. And you're right, people treat it like vitamins. It's so easy to get. It's cheaper than what you get at GNC. It's absurd how the market's saturated with it. And people have access. They don't know any better. And they're like, yeah, fuck it. Why not? And that is unfortunate. So how I balance, I don't really know how I balance kind of my defense of people doing what they think is in their best interest versus kind of protecting against all the fucking idiots that are going to be influenced into making really bad choices that set them back or cause more harm than whatever they got out of it. It's a really hard balance to strike. Like, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, too much honesty can be difficult. Like, the two, I guess, ends of the spectrum. On one end, just no one talks about it, right? Like, everyone is a fake natural. Oh, we're natural, of course we are. But they're using. It has negative consequences, sure. Like, lying is not great about this stuff. But then there's like people who show themselves injecting on camera, and it's like, here's my full cycle, and this is where I get it, and it's like, these are all the benefits, and it's like, you're talking up and putting it on a pedestal, except it's not a pedestal, because everyone can get it. It's like, it's on a pedestal that's within reach and very easy to get.
Yeah.
So I think, there have been a few channels where I think they've been a little bit too much, like, pushing it. But then, like where do you be in the middle of that? Like, between fake natural and, like, going yourself, doing it, and then, like, how great it is. Like, yeah, it's a very tough decision. Then also, like, the consumer does have some responsibility there as well, right? And, like, where do you strike that balance? Like, do you just say, hey, I'm not natural, and this is about what I take, but you mention specifics? But then, like, education is still important. If someone's going to be talking about education just because there's a demand for it, right? Like, different for more place, more dates, and there's other channels who talk cycles and stuff. Is it bad to talk about cycles? Like, there are negative externalities there, right? Like, you talk about those very directly, and this compound does this. Like, it does incentivize some people to use it, and some of those people maybe should not be using it.
No, I agree with that. Yeah, and it's like, freedom is a motherfucker. The second people have the ability to make their own decisions, they're going to make really bad ones in very large numbers. So it's it's crazy. All you can do is really be honest and frame the positives and benefits, along with the very, very real negative consequences. And there's even lines in the sand I've drawn, because this is a hobby. This is something I do for fun. I know exactly where my upper limit is. I'm a gatekeeper. I stand no risk of setting records, and I'm not going to break myself trying to do that. So if over the next 5 or 10 years, if I squeeze out another 5 or 10% of my numbers, that's fantastic. But they always start with wisdom. Like, you go on the forums, they're like, oh, you got to do it smart. You go low dose, and oh, time on is time off. And, this is how you do it. And then you start competing. And this is the benefit of competing, is the insight it gives you, because meatheads and competitors, their favorite thing to talk about is their training, their diet, and what gear they're blasting. And you don't have to be around very long before you realize what people do. And nobody goes off. And I mean, nobody goes off. And a lot of people, it's not blast and cruise, it's blast and blast more. And that's a trade-off that they make. And I can look at you and be like, dude, you're doing this for a hobby. Like, you don't make money off this. You spend thousands of dollars a year to compete, to try to drive your mediocre Instagram following. It's like, you want to talk to somebody, but they have their mindset and that's what they want to do. But the environment out there perpetuates that. So like, okay, testosterone. I have strong views on test. I'm like the weed guy 10 years ago about it's medicinal, man. Like, it's good for you. Used in reasonable doses, reasonable being replacement doses, 200 milligrams a week. I see it as having a lot of benefits with very, very minimal downside. And I think most medical professionals or endocrinologists would probably agree with that. Again, doesn't mean everybody needs to go out and get a script, but it can solve a lot of problems that are associated with aging and winding down to die, and a lot of things we think of as relating to midlife crises. So I'll probably be on a low dose of test for the rest of my life. That's a decision I made. I've talked to doctors about it. I've talked to my wife about it. That's a trade-off. That's something I'm willing to do. That is night and fucking day from the 2 grams a week. Tren is a nasty drug. I think it's recently been found to be psychotoxic or neurotoxic.
Yeah.
Neurotoxic, which makes complete sense because you get guys that experience like homicidal ideation or like violent thoughts, violent dreams, aggression spikes through the roof. I've equated it to the villain from Fern Gully. Tim Curry's character, the smoke monster or whatever. Like, it is a nasty fucking drug. You look at these orals. The orals were the easiest thing to get. I've gotten orals off of eBay before, and it's so easy to access. People think, oh, it's a pill, so it's easier. And it's like, no, it's way worse. Like, way worse.
Yeah.
It's liver toxic. It's all of the negative side effects are going to be ratcheted up to 11. But people see that, they think it's better than an injection. So I think the education can go a lot, and it can do a lot. And to do that, you have to have an honest, open discussion. But you can't be the guy out there being like, oh, you want to get jacked and fucking juicy like me? Like, this is what you're going to take. It is a hard thing to regulate. So
yeah, that's where when Greg Doucette put testosterone in a list of natural supplements for ectomorphs, it actually fucking pissed me off, because that's the gateway. Like, that's someone's an ectomorph, they've been chronically undereating, maybe they've been lifting a few years, and then like they just have testosterone tossed in this list of supplements. Like, that's one thing that was like, I mean, how could you even put that in a list of supplements? It's just like way over the top. But yeah, it's one of those things where there's not that much good education, and again, that balance is super tricky. And I've heard stories of guys, because like people in the industry talk, even if I'm not like in the US and going to meet and stuff, like people still talk online, and it's one of those things where you hear about a lifter, and like, I won't name him because I still respect him a lot, but like, you read their article on like station and technique and stuff, and then like a few years later you realize that they were on like 5 grams of stuff or something.
Yeah.
And you're just like, well, like that might have contributed a little bit. And so, I think it's one of those things where it's not talked about as much. And, it certainly does have a tremendous impact. But yeah,